So I went from being the top center on the roster to the third string center on the roster, and most NFL teams don't keep three centers. So I barely made the team, ended up not even dressing the majority of that year. Went into a pretty deep depression.
Welcome to the New Age Sage podcast, where you come to free your mind from all the things that keep you in suffering. Today's guest is Joe Hawley. He is a former NFL player. We get into his life after the NFL. Please like and subscribe. Thank you. Welcome on the show.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me, bro.
So I'm curious about how you transitioned from a hard NFL life into the spiritual, energetic world you live in now. What marked that transition? You know, I don't come from the NFL, but I came from a very matrix, rigid background that then suddenly combusted into some spiritual life.
What were you before you started doing this? What did you do?
I graduated college 2 years ago.
Okay.
So I was going to an Ivy League school. I was very set on finance or something along those lines.
Big business, finance, like the big money stuff.
Yeah, all the matrix
Wall
stuff.
Street.
Yeah, exactly, all that. And then something happened. So, like all of us in this world.
Yeah.
So,
seems like it's happening more and more.
Yeah.
Mine was definitely a slow process. I mean, I played in the NFL for 8 years, played football for 16, had lived out a childhood dream and accomplished everything I put my mind to. Made a lot of money, had a really, beautiful fiance at the time, had all the nice cars, big house. And I had this moment, there's a lot of variables that went into this. I started reading books. I read my first book when I was 24, which I think if I trace it back to the genesis of my unraveling, I played with Tony Gonzalez, who is one of the greatest tight ends to ever play the game of football. He's in the Hall of Fame now. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. I was graced with the opportunity to play with him his final 3 years in Atlanta. And before his final game, he got up, and he wasn't a big rah-rah speech guy, but he got up in front of the team the Saturday night before our final game and said a few words because he had a 17-year career, played a long time. And I don't really remember everything he said, but the one thing he said there's three things that have had a direct impact on my success and who I am as a person. And I don't remember the other two, but one of the things that really stood out was the power of reading books that he shared. And that really stuck with me for some reason. And so that off season, I texted him and I said, "Hey man, I've been really thinking about what you said, and is there any books that you recommend?" And he recommended a few books, but there's this book that I got. It's the first book I ever really read intentionally. It's called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. And looking back on it now, it's fascinating how many parallels there are from that book into my journey when I walked away from the NFL. Mm-hmm. But it's a story about this guy, this trial lawyer who has a heart attack, and he's doing all the things that he's just grinding, hustling, making a ton of money, living that lifestyle, and he has a heart attack in court. And basically, the doctor tells him, if you're going to live, you have to let go of your law practice. And so he decides to sell everything, and he goes on the spiritual journey up to the Himalayan mountains because he feels this calling on his heart to find these mystical monks that he heard about. And so he goes on this pilgrimage, ends up finding them. It's a really cool story. And he works with them for a couple years, and he comes back. And I think the really powerful part is the return to his old life. And one of his mentees, one of the people he's mentoring at the time that wanted his life. He's like a younger guy, straight out of school, trying to be a lawyer, trying to get to the big time. And he comes back and he has this conversation with him at the end of the book. And the guy doesn't recognize him because he's so vibrant, so healthy, and he just talks about the glow in his eyes. But when he speaks, he recognizes his voice. And he's like, "Oh my God." And that really struck with me that health and vibrancy is so much more important than these external things that we put so much value on. And so that was the genesis. I started reading books. Really, that kind of started opening my mind and expanding my mind. And, eventually, through a lot of different variables, decided to walk away from the game, and my last year, I lost my starting job 5 different times in my career for a wide variety of different reasons.
What was that like, the pressure of that? 'Cause I remember in high school, like getting cut from the start, starting in the basketball team, that destroyed me. So I can't imagine what it's like in the NFL. What'd that feel
Yeah.
like in that moment where you been working for years, you finally got your dream, and then they were like, "Oh, you can't have it." What'd that feel like?
Yeah, it was interesting. I think one of the really big moments was after my second year. My first year I didn't start. I was a backup. I had my first opportunity to start in my second year, but it was at right guard, and I got drafted as a center. And so I'm a pretty undersized center. Made up for that with my tenacity and my smarts and my understanding of the game and my leadership. But at guard, these guys are usually a lot bigger, a lot stronger, and they maul guys. It's just a little bit different position. And so I played 9 games at guard, and I was a little bit out of position. But the starting center at the time was a 13-year vet, and so his contract was up, and they drafted me to replace him eventually. And so going into that offseason, he was not on the roster anymore, and I was the top center on the roster. So I went into that offseason thinking I'm going to be the top dog. I'm the starting center. I was telling all my friends and just like really acting like my shit didn't stink. I was like, this is my job. And went into the draft, the 2012 draft. And as a player, it's really interesting because if they draft a player in your position in the top first or second round, it's not a good thing because they're going to give that guy every opportunity because they invested a top draft pick. So it's pretty stressful as a player to watch the draft, and you're just hoping like don't draft somebody in my position. But I wasn't worried about it. One of my friends, who was a third string tight end at the time, because Tony Gonzalez was set to retire, he was really nervous that they were going to draft a tight end, and he wasn't going to have a job. So he was like sweating bullets. I was totally good. And we decided to go to this local bar. There's probably a handful of my teammates there, and we were watching the game the draft on the TV. And we had traded our first round pick away to draft Julio Jones the year before. So our first pick was in the second round, pick 55. And I'll never forget when it was like pick 53, on Twitter, the news comes a lot quicker than on the TV. I'll never forget my friend coming over to me. He's like, dude, you're not going to believe this. I'm like, what? He's like, we drafted a center with our top pick. And I kind of laughed in that moment because I didn't believe it. And I can even feel it in my heart right now. It's like, what do you mean? And then moments later, I see, we drafted the number one center in college football. And the feelings I felt were really intense. I mean, I felt rejected. I felt betrayed. I felt humiliated. I felt all of it. And it really put me into a downward spiral of not really trusting anyone, and especially the team and the organization, because nobody communicated that to me. And that's one thing with the NFL, it's really challenging. I think some teams are better than others, but the way that they don't really communicate where you're at as a player, what you can do to be better, what you need to work on. They kind of just, you need to show up and be the best and kind of know what they're expecting of you. And so obviously there was something that they didn't see in me that I didn't know about. Drafted the top center, and went into that next year going from thinking I was going to be the starting center to, and then actually 2 weeks later after the draft, they signed that veteran back to a 1-year deal. So I went from being the top center on the roster to the third string center on the roster, and most NFL teams don't keep 3 centers. So I barely made the team, ended up not even dressing the majority of that year. Went into a pretty deep depression. Like I remember, probably wouldn't have called it that back then, but looking back on it, like I was drinking every night when I'd come home from the football practice. I was taking a lot of pain pills, smoking a lot of weed, and yeah, it was really challenging. And I was just in this victim mindset. Like I'd go into the facility and my body language was bad, and I just I felt so like nobody gave me a chance. I was waiting for a chance and nobody gave it to me, and ended up that year about halfway through failed a drug test, performance enhancing drug test for taking Adderall, and the amphetamine showed up on my drug test. I didn't know at the time that showed up on a PED test. I thought it would be like a street drug test, and ended up getting suspended for 4 games. And that was a big wake-up call at that moment. I was like, oh crap, like I'm really fucking up here and I need to focus. And when I came back from that suspension, I was just re-energized to really shift the perception that the team had about me. But I came back from that suspension, and it felt like I was walking around the facility as like this dead man walking. It was a really interesting experience because there's 53 men on the roster. When someone gets suspended, the week they come back, they're allowed to have 54 men on the roster because they bring somebody in to replace me for that 4 weeks. And then they get a week to decide, it's like a buffer period, who they want to keep. So that week that I came back was really strange because I was allowed to be there because an extra person on the roster, but they didn't let me practice. Like I was standing on the sideline and just like felt really shitty in the energy of everybody looking at me. And I just felt like, man, this is really off. And then it culminated in that week we were traveling to Detroit. And also I'd like to state this year we are crushing it as a team. I think we ended up 13-3 and the number one seed in the playoffs. And so our team was having really a lot of success. And so I was going through this experience where I felt like I wasn't a part of the team, which is really hard for me. If I'm not starting and competing, even when I was a backup and I was like really strongly connected to the team, if I wasn't actually playing and starting, I felt like I wasn't really contributing, and that was really hard for me. I felt isolated, disconnected. So the fact that the team was doing really well and I wasn't a part of it was just really, really challenging in that way. And so I came back from that week, felt like I was a dead man walking, and on Saturday we were going to travel to Detroit and play the Lions. And on Saturdays when we travel, all of our bags are laid out in the locker room so that we can put our pads in it, our helmet, and anything that we want to pack in our bag so that we can travel, and the equipment staff takes it. Everybody's bags are on the ground except mine's up in the locker still. And back to the communication piece, nobody had communicated to me that I wasn't traveling or what was going on. It was just this energy. It felt really strange. And so I was like, nobody's talked to me. So I just pulled my bag down and started packing it. And right at that moment, the head coach, Mike Smith, walked by and he saw me and he said, "Joe, what are you doing?" I was like, "I'm packing my bag, coach." He's like, "Oh, nobody told you. You're not traveling this week." And so that was like, oh shit. And that was when I really knew like the writing on the wall, like they're gonna cut me. And so went in, had to watch the game from my apartment by myself, watch the team, the Falcons, go crush the Lions and get one step closer to being the number one seed and having this opportunity to go on the Super Bowl run. And I watched it alone. And it was really sitting with those feelings and those thoughts. It was really challenging. My agent called me after the game. He said, "Hey, I think the team's going to cut you tomorrow." So I was kind of preparing for that. Sure enough, one of the scouts called me after the game. He's like, "Hey, make sure you come in tomorrow morning, first thing. Thomas, the GM, and Mike, the head coach, want to see you." I'm like, okay. So I knew I was about to get cut. And so I drove in. I'll never forget this day. I think it was December 23rd. It was 2 days before Christmas. It was an off day, so nobody was really in the facility. We had just beat the Lions. We were a couple games away from the playoffs. And I drive to the facility, and I'm just like replaying like my whole career, my whole, like every decision I made. And I'm just like, man, trying to make sense of like, how did I get here? And I pull up to the facility. I walk up the stairs into the head coach's office. It's a really like beautiful, big office. There's like a lounge sofa area, and then this desk, and then like all the playbooks. And I walk in there, and Thomas Dimitrov and Mike Smith, the GM and the head coach, are sitting down. I said, "Oh, Joe, come in, take a seat." And as I walked in, I literally felt like I was walking above my body because there was so much adrenaline pumping in my system. And it was like this big dissociation, and I was just like, whoa, like floating, trying to be present, trying to breathe. Sat down, and pretty quickly they're like, "Joe, we've made a decision. We're going to let you go." And I was really surprised by what I felt in that moment, because I hadn't felt it up to that point, and the finality of the decision. When it hit me, I was just flooded with this deep sense of regret. And it felt really gross. It felt like it was this energy of finally feeling the responsibility of all the decisions that I made that got me in that chair, about to be released, about to squander my childhood dream of playing in the NFL, and it's not anybody else's fault but mine. And that regret was just so intense. And we had a little bit of a conversation. I don't remember a lot of what I said. I was kind of blacked out, but I remember it was the first time I really stood up for myself and communicated what was on my heart. And one of the things I shared was, if you guys go to the playoffs, you guys are going to be the number one seed. And they brought in another guy to replace me from the Saints practice squad. And so I said, if Todd McClure, who was the starting center at the time, if he gets hurt in the playoffs, would you trust this other guy or would you trust me to take you to the Super Bowl? And they sat back and they looked at each other as if it was like the first time that they had ever thought about that, which I find fascinating. And they looked at me and they said, Joe, I guess we're going to have to trust the other guy. And I said, okay, that's all I needed to know. And I turned around, walked out, and proceeded to go through the checkout process. I signed out with the trainers, signed the papers. I turned all my equipment in, signed the papers. And, as I was walking through the locker room, just like grieving, like crying, like this real intense hollowness and energy that was even hard to process. I found myself back up in the office signing the final papers. And because I'd been on the roster for most of the year, the guy was telling me, he's like, if we make it to the Super Bowl, then we'll owe you some money. So I was like having that conversation. Then all of a sudden his phone rings. And he answers it. He says a few words and he's like, oh, that's strange. He said, that was Thomas Dimitrov. They want to see you in the office. And it was right across the hall. So I walk out, go back into the head coach's office, and they sit me down and they say, Joe, we thought about what you said, and we've decided we're going to keep you on the roster. And I was like, okay, wow, yeah. And they're like, is that like, do you want to show up and work? You're going to be the 53rd man. You're going to have to work your way back up. Is that something you want? And I said, yes, sir. And 2 weeks later, first round of the playoffs, I was dressed on the sideline as the backup for Todd McClure. We ended up winning that game and then ended up losing an NFC Championship game. But that was a pivotal point, not only in my career, but in my life. Because in that moment when I felt that regret and walked out of that room, I made a promise to myself that there's going to come a time when my football career is over, but I don't want it to be when I'm not ready. I don't want it to be because somebody else told me I wasn't good enough. When I'm done playing, I wanted to know that I gave the game everything I had and to leave it all on the field. And I never wanted to feel that feeling of regret again. And that completely shifted my career around. I ended up playing another 5 years, and turned it around in a really big way.
When did that conditional, in that story I hear, because I've been in similar spots, not to the same extent, different background, but in that story is some feeling in you that you're only worthy of love or affection or admiration if you are a function, if you're good at being a football player, right? When did that start for you? When do you think that wound was created in you that made you to have these desires and feelings of unworthiness?
It's a great question, and it's something that's very present in my life right now. I think it's been a lifelong journey, and I think a lot of, as I've gone on this my own path of healing and uncovering this wound, it's the wound of rejection and the fear of rejection, and I think I've come to know that it's a foundational fear that we all experience.
Yeah.
And it's really the disconnection from spirit, feeling like we're rejected by God, and in reality we're the ones rejecting ourselves. And I went to Peru a couple months ago on a deep pilgrimage journey, working with some plant medicine in the Sacred Valley, and about a month before this trip, I had an experience with my father, and my he's not a bad dude. He's a great guy, but he's just, I think, like many men in that generation, just not very present, and kind of lives in a deep state of fear, and a religious evangelical Christian in the very narrow-minded, closed-minded sense. And he, I definitely see how my career, like, I was really after that approval.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I've wanted my whole life, and I didn't know this at the time, is for him to see me, to accept me, to love me. And so about a month before this Peru trip, I sat down with him to ask for some support. I'm opening a retreat center 90 minutes outside of town, and I got hit with a pretty big renovation cost, and I've invested a lot of my money in that project, and so not having a traditional job, it's hard to get a mortgage without a pay stub. And so I was like, I'll ask my dad to help co-sign and support. And sat down with him, and the conversation we had was really intense. The feelings I left that conversation with, I felt deeply rejected by him, deeply unsupported, deeply unseen, and that like deep amount of anger and rage that I hadn't felt in a long time, because me and my dad have never really been very close. He's always been in my life. He's never really been like abusive or a bad man, but he's just never been present, and he's never really shared his life experience with me in the way that a son needs to evolve and grow. And all he would really do is push, if I had a question about life, it'd be like, hey, go connect with Jesus. Go talk to Jesus, go to church, read the Bible. And so there's very hollow, the mentorship that I really desired from him. And so I never really had an energetic connection with him. There's always been this kind of dull hum in the background. He just was never really present. So I was really surprised when all this rage and anger came up. And so I went into it and I processed it. And what I felt was rejected. And what I realized is that this fear of rejection has been an underlying foundational story my entire life. And it started with the church and the belief structure that I grew up in. Feeling rejected by God, feeling unworthy by God, and the fear and the shame that comes with that. And then that developed this fear of being rejected by my family for who I am, for the questions I was asking. And so I learned at a very young age that it's not okay for me to shine bright, to be curious, to be great, to really expand into my fullest authentic self. And so there's always been a part of me that, because I had this fear of being rejected, I rejected that part within myself. And what I realized is that showed up in every single interaction of my life. And I had developed this inferiority complex where I'd be around successful people or famous people or really high achievers, and I would feel insecure, like these people have something I don't. And what I realized is, been learning a lot about Jungian philosophy around the shadow and the unconscious. And there's this concept called the golden shadow. So a lot of people, think the shadow is, evil or darkness, or the parts of yourself that
I
are
was just about to
scary.
ask you that about the golden shadow. So could you say
Yeah.
that? Yeah.
So the golden shadow is, you can put in your shadows your greatness,
Your power,
your power, your light, all the things that are great about you can put in your shadow because they weren't accepted, received, loved when you were a kid. And so I had this massive golden shadow that I didn't really know about at the time. And what would happen is I would project all of my greatness onto these others who I perceived as great. And they are great, but I would put them above me on this pedestal because I would project my shadow, and that would make me feel unworthy, less than. And so going on this journey of really understanding that I was rejecting that part of myself out of fear of being rejected. And that's the interesting thing about fear, is fear manifests the very thing that you're trying to protect yourself from. And so my fear of being rejected by others means I'll just first reject myself so that I don't have to feel rejected, which is therefore kind of propelling the very story of rejection within my life. And so I went to Peru, and I worked with a cactus, Wachuma, and a few different ceremonies. It was really beautiful. And I had the opportunity, actually, so after that connection with my dad and that conversation and all this anger and rage came up, like a week later, I had the opportunity, a spot opened up on this trip with one of my friends who was facilitating and leading it. And he was like, you got to come. And I knew that there was this synchronicity and this opportunity to follow the thread of, I know I'm supposed to be there, and I know I'm supposed to go there and grieve this wound and this feeling of needing my parents to be something for me, and being able to fully let that idea go and let that die. And the medicine really helped hold me in that grieving process in a really beautiful way. And it's been really beautiful over the last couple of months since coming back from that. I feel this deep sense of freedom and this expansion of who I am. And it's really fascinating because I had a objectively very successful life. I mean, I made it to one of the hardest things to do in the world, which is play in the NFL and then play 8 years, starting 54 games, made $13 million. So everything's like, what are you talking about? You did it all. But there's always a part of me that lived in a state of fear. And so I always think like, what am I actually capable of? If I was actually able to achieve all of that with this underlying fear of part of me was playing small, what am I actually capable of? And I'm really excited to see where this expansion takes me in
Yeah,
life.
in my experience, first of the family piece where I've gotten to it is I have a similar experience with my father where it wasn't his fault. Again, nice guy, I wasn't conscious, right? But for me, it was I only felt worthy of his love if I was smart, if I was like killer academically or achieving things in an intellectual domain. So that made me motivate myself constantly, unconsciously to be great for his approval. I never got it, obviously. But where I'm at now is that my understanding is if I didn't have that shadow, if I didn't have that piece of me that needed his validation to be dominant, to be strong, to be loved, I wouldn't have the drive I do. I just wouldn't. I
Mm.
wouldn't want to do these things. So for me, it's kind of transmuting that into something I love and losing like the need to prove, but still having that force in me that wants this thing. I realize my soul chose this. My soul chose this move. My soul chose this shadow. I got to put it somewhere where it's useful for me in some way. You know?
Yeah, finding gratitude for it, right?
Yeah.
Not thinking it should be anything different. Like I'm really grateful for the journey I've been on because it has, provided this deep drive and passion. And that's one thing I felt when all that anger and rage came up. It was really intense and I allowed myself to express it. That was one thing that I have the tools now to express it. But it felt good because I knew that since I've been done playing, one of the things I've been dancing with, I played 8 years in the NFL. When I was done playing, I traveled the country in my van nomadically, and I was just really this like free spirit nomadic, really like not needing, like really in the feminine energy, like not really needing to create anything because I have this security blanket with this money. And so that, as I've gotten into my entrepreneurial journey over the last few years, really showed up in instead of really working hard, I would just hire people to help me, or like I wasn't showing up in the same like with the same discipline and the same tenacity and the same passion, the same fire as I did when what got me to being great in the NFL. And that's what's required. And sometimes it comes out in an unhealthy way, but when you're able to channel that in a positive way, it's really beautiful. And so when I felt all that anger, I was like, oh, this feels good because what this does is it's like it's an energy that I can bring through as a passion into my creations, because when I look at the rejection wound and the energy dynamic within my family, all it is wounding and it's trauma and it's the societal indoctrination of overlaid on this reality of what we think the world is, what we've been taught the world is, what we've been told happiness is and success looks like, and what the journey of life is meant to be. And breaking down that paradigm is really challenging. But this experience with my father brought up all this anger and rage, and I'm now channeling it into a passion to support this great shift that's taking place right now and this great paradigm shift, and helping support people in the letting go of these stories that are no longer holding us captive. We have this opportunity to really break free, and it's deep work and it's hard work, and it does require a warrior spirit to really show up and be disciplined and know why you're showing up and doing it. And so, yeah, I'm really grateful for all of that and the journey I've been on, and being able to channel that into the projects I'm working on is very powerful.
Yeah, going back to something else you said about your family, I think it's a good point to touch upon is what helped me is kind of accept. I think we unconsciously expect our fathers or mothers to be who we want them to be, to give us a love that we desire in some way. What helped me, I think you referred to it in your journey, was really forcing myself to accept them exactly as they are. That my dad is this person. He's not going to change ever. I can't expect him to change. My expectation of him changing and being the way I want him to be is what's creating all the suffering. So that for me, what help a fuck ton. I can help people out there struggling with family stuff is just force yourself to accept them as they are. Like really just say, okay, Dad, you are this way. How can I actually give myself what I'm desiring you to give me that you never will give me? That's the journey. What's the journey for me, right? Is saying, my dad's this way. How can I love him for exactly that? And then how can I actually give myself what I needed him to give me? So off that point, how are you giving yourself or finding ways to give yourself what you needed your dad to give you that you didn't get?
Yeah, just to speak to that a little bit, I think one of the things, because there's different parts of ourselves, right? And there is the inner child part of our psyche that does need our parents to be a certain thing. And as we grow older, we evolve into being able to support ourselves and care for ourselves and no longer dependent on them. And a lot of times, because we don't have the right type of processes built into our society and culture, it's hard for that energy dynamic to shift and evolve into peers with the parents.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's really missing that I'm really passionate about is the lack of initiatory processes and ritual processes, especially for young boys into manhood. And there's every culture you can track around the world, indigenous tribes and ancient civilizations, they all have had rite of passage experiences built into their society and culture because they understood the psychological developmental processes that inner child part of you needs to die for you to evolve and step into becoming a man. And because we lack that, there's that inner child part of ourselves. And so when we get into our 20s, it's like we want to be looked at like a man from our father's eyes, but they still look at us like children because the whole family dynamic is involved in that process. In the ancient tribes, there's stories of, the kids, the boys would be with the women in the tribe up until they reached puberty, like 12 or 13 years old. And then they would, there's a story of a tribe, I forget which tribe it is, but they would come, the men would all leave at night. They would paint themselves all white, like ghosts. They would do like a mock raid of the village in the middle of the night. They would kidnap the boys of this age, and the women would know, and they would, oh my God, what's happening? They would take them. So it's this really frightening experience. They would take them out of the village, and in a very like intense way, basically act as if they were going to kill them. And it was a very intense experience. And I'm not saying this is something that we need to do, but it just kind of proves the point of they would take them to the depths of experiencing their own death. And then towards the end of the experience, they would do a ceremony and they would welcome these boys who went through this death experience. They would literally have to confront their death in a very visceral way. They would welcome them back, reborn as men. And they would walk back with the elders of the tribe. And the whole tribe would treat those boys like men now. So the women would no longer mother them in the way they did. They would treat them like a man. The men would start taking them and teaching them the ways of what it takes to be a strong man and to support the tribe in this way. So there's this transition period that our society lacks. And I think if you could point to one of the real issues that we're facing right now, is all these like collective systemic issues that everybody talks about, like climate change and the financial systems and, equality and the wealth gap and, all these problems. It really comes down to bad leadership, immature leadership. We have a bunch of psychologically underdeveloped leaders running around in grown men bodies. And it's because we lack these initiatory processes that develop the psyche in a very mature way. So I just wanted to speak to that because I think it's really powerful that those kid, that kid in me that was feeling rejected, being able to allow that part of me to die. And in order to do that, it only happens through the somatic experiencing and the grief of releasing that story through the body. You can't just force your way or think your way into healing.
What was that initiatory experience for you? Was there one experience you had that really marked that change? Did you create your own kind of tribal moment of initiating to your manhood? Or what was a moment where you felt like, okay, I'm a man now? Was there a moment for you? Or was it a gradual journey?
That was a gradual journey. I think there's a lot of pseudo initiations within football. A lot of different, like every year it felt like a new initiation because there's a new team. I had to figure out who I was within that team and who I was as a leader within that team and how I was looked at. And, I had a wide variety of different coaches who I looked up to and who taught me a lot. And, I really lacked it from my father. And so when I started playing football my freshman year of high school, that's what I fell in love with was, there's male role models here, some good, some bad. And I was able to gather a lot of my own experience of what it takes to be a man through my own experience. And yeah, I think I'm grateful for it because it really showed me a lot and taught me a lot of who I am. And being able to alchemize that journey into what I'm doing now is, yeah, it's really powerful.
Yeah, mine was when my mom died. That's when I really became a man in some way.
Mm.
That I wouldn't say it was some spiritual occurrence that happened to her as her time to go, but for me,
How old were you when that happened?
this was last year. So
Oh,
for me,
wow.
it really like something in me. I didn't know what would come of it when it happened. I was like, how the fuck is it gonna affect me? Thankfully, I used to be drug addict. Thankfully, that was no
You
longer the
didn't go
case,
to
or
drugs, yeah.
I would not. I don't think I'd be alive. Thankfully,
Mm.
I kicked that habit about 3 years ago. But something in me like died, and I don't know what I think it was. This coddling. It's like not maybe inner child part of me that like needed to be taken care of.
Yeah, the nurturing
Yeah,
energy of the
yeah.
mother.
Part of me that needed that. I didn't even know I needed it. Right? I was unconscious.
Yeah.
I never thought about it that way. I was close with her. We talked every day, but I didn't kind of use her that way. But I felt it was an energy that
Mm-hmm.
she was giving me that energy, like unconsciously. Even her just sending me that love, energy wise. Once that was clipped, that I really had to learn to give it to myself, and that was when I
Mm.
became a man. Where I really didn't need that mothering energy from my ex girlfriend anymore, or female future female partners. I really was able to give it to myself. I
Mm.
wouldn't wish that upon any man, but that really was like that
Yeah. How
forced
did
me
you
into.
process that grief? Because that's what it is, right? It's this
Yeah.
intense amount of grief.
Yeah, I did a lot of somatic work.
Mm.
Thankfully, I had the knowledge then. I did a lot of studies in this field and stuff like that
Mm-hmm.
to know that I can't tackle this logically. I have to. So I did a fuck ton of like deep somatic
Mm-hmm.
work where I was definitely
Beautiful. Feeling
accessing.
it all.
Yeah, I went hard in it. I was definitely accessed DMT for sure through the
Yeah.
breath. Like I wasn't here. I was
Mm-hmm.
floating around, but it
Wow.
was terrifying. Like I did a deep somatic breath work the day after she died, and I fully felt I was dying because I went
Mm.
straight into my body. I had no because my I think of the ego as like bodyguards. Like they're bodyguards blocking us from accessing the emotion in our body, and that's the thoughts we have. Like they're blocking us from feeling within.
Mm.
So I felt that leave, and I was just fully in my body with all the grief stuck in it. And
Mm.
that was intense. I literally felt like I was dying. But
Wow.
on the other side of that, I cleared a lot. I could look at
Yeah.
my family members. It's not judgment to them. There's still so much pain in their bodies.
They don't know how to grieve.
It's still so
Yeah.
stuck. They're doing it their own way. It's okay, but it's
Mm-hmm.
just still so stuck in
Yeah.
in their bodies. And even not parent wound, but we all have our own grief
Mm-hmm.
for some reason. What was your grief? Was it how was it the NFL story? Was it did you have to do a grieving process for leaving that? What was like the grief that you had to release from your body? I'm going to give you a break to digest all this amazing information. And in this break, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.
Yeah, man. I think that's what I'm really passionate about now is really supporting elite athletes in that transition process because there's not a lot of resources.
You literally die, like
For
your identity dies.
literally, yeah, like the whole everything I'd ever worked for,
Yeah.
everything I'd ever thought I'd be, everything I ever wanted, I got to live it and accomplish it. And it's interesting because there's always a part of me that felt like it wasn't good enough because you need to have that part in order to keep going. Like I'm not good. Like I can be better. I can be better. I can be better. And so waking up out of that, I was like, when does that journey end? And realize, oh, it doesn't. I have to decide to walk away from this. And so my final year, going into my 8th year, they brought me back. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers brought me back on a 1-year contract. They said I was to compete for my starting job once again with a younger guy, but what I realized is they were just bringing me back to mentor this younger guy at my position. And so I lost my starting job for the 5th time in my career. And I knew, week 1, I had lost this like passion to like go get my job back. And in that moment, I knew it was like, okay, this is going to be my final year. And that was the moment that started really stripping away my life. And I was engaged at the time, so I told my fiance that this is going to be my last year playing, and really surprised by how unsupportive she was of that. I mean, I guess I'm not surprised. It made me realize how it's not just my attachments to this identity, but her attachments to being a football NFL player's wife and the money that comes with that, the fame, the recognition, and she didn't want to let go of that.
Are you
So
still with her, or
no, we that because she was unsupportive, it really showed her true colors of, oh, she loves me for this thing that I am, but not the deeper parts. And what I realized through that journey is, how can I expect anyone to love me for who I am when I don't know who I am? And so one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, that was one really hard year. But 4 weeks before my final game, I finally broke up with her. And that was a whole process. So we went to therapy, went to couples therapy, went to individual therapy, and we got to a point I was like, I can't do this. And it was actually a really insane moment I had sitting in, and it's funny how we like kind of manifest the energy within a partnership unconsciously that represents our parents' energy
yeah,
in
yeah, of course.
partnership. And so she was a little bit, emotionally abusive. Um, I felt like didn't really care for my feelings, and I had this moment when I was trying to share like what how I was feeling and how I was hurt, and I forget exactly what it was. It doesn't really matter, but I just didn't feel seen or heard, and she turned it on me, and I had this moment where I just gave up. And I was like, I love this woman so much, I don't want to argue with her, so I'll just give up. And I had this literally flash of my whole life and how my dad and my mom ended up where they're at because my dad gave up. The reason he wasn't present, the reason he's not vibrant, is because he decided, I'm just going to give all my power away to this woman. And when I saw that literally flash in front of my eyes, that's when I knew. I was like, this is where I break the cycle. This is where I choose differently. This is where I choose to love myself more than anyone else. And realizing now that I can only love another to the extent that I love myself. And so I can't expect this person to love me if I don't even know how to love myself. And so it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. It felt like I was literally ripping out my own heart and choosing to do that. And it took some time to decouple that. And it was 4 weeks before my final game, and played my final game. Luckily, I had an opportunity to there's a couple people that went on IR towards the end of the season. So I got to play and start my final 4 games, which was a really cool experience because, like I shared earlier, I wanted to walk away on my own terms, not because I couldn't compete anymore, but because I decided it was my time to go. And I'm grateful that the universe gave me this opportunity to play the final 4 games of my career, because I played probably some of the best football I ever played. And then like a week after my final game, I was sitting in my apartment, and the energy was still filled with the grief from this breakup and the finality of never being able to play the game that I loved sank in, and I just started crying. It felt like there's literally like a void in my chest that was just like a torrent, and it was just like so intense and so much energy and so much feeling. And so that's what made me decide to go on a journey, a pilgrimage of my own and my own initiation. It was
That could have been your initiation of the whole experience.
100%, this calling on my heart that it's time to walk away, not really knowing why, but trusting it and going through the challenges of stripping away all the things and actively participating in that. And then getting to a point where, I didn't have the language for it at the time, but intuitively I was like, I need to go on a journey, a pilgrimage, a self-discovery. I need to figure out who I am. And so I wanted to strip it all away, and I continued to do
Yeah.
so.
I want to speak to that decision you made to let her go is massive. Like, I think most men, if you look at most marriages, honestly, this is me being 100% real. If you look at most marriages, it's men like that who couldn't make the decision. They realize, 3-4 years spent with this woman, they were just like, you know what? I can't fucking let this go. I just have to settle for this bullshit. I have to settle for this treatment. I can't be fucked to go out into the world and do it again. It's just like settling a mediocrity. And even
Yeah,
like I had this woman,
so often.
on my podcast, this hormone specialist, who literally said that for a fact that a man's testosterone is quite literally dependent on a woman who respects him at home.
Oh, fascinating.
That like literally like men's testosterone levels would get tanked if their spouse doesn't respect them. And that's why you see so many. Most men who I see are just, I don't mean this judgmentally, but are weak and they don't seem like strong and virile. I ask about the relationships. They have a woman who just doesn't respect them at all.
Yeah, you know why that is because they give their power away to this woman because they love her so much, but that woman, what they need is not to be the leader of the household. They need the man to show up and be the leader of the household. And the way you do that is by having the courage to go through and follow through on your passions that God places on your heart, of your deeper purpose, and going on the journey of, I know why I'm here. I know what I'm here to do. And when a woman, that's what attracts a woman to a man. And then it erodes because of our societal structure into like, okay, I need to, and the woman's going to try and take that power. And it's like the masculine, healthy masculine of holding that loving presence and that energy of being the leader and the driver. And obviously there's energy dynamics in here that's not just like so binary with just male, female, but being able to drive towards your purpose is what earns the respect from the female and the support. So it's really fascinating, those dynamics, man. Wow.
Yeah, for sure. My experience, I had a similar experience to you. I kind of saw that in a way. You had to let go of that, even unconsciously. Maybe you didn't know it, but some higher calling made you let go of that so you could then find your deep purpose by going alone, right? Imagine if that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
You would never have found your true calling from that experience, right?
Yeah.
For me, I had like a vision like you. I was with a girlfriend of mine for 3 years. I thought I was going to marry her, loved her deeply, but I saw this thing of, I had this deep vision. I can't go to where I'm trying to manifest, successfully wise, like purpose wise, with her. I can't. I saw it very clearly multiple times, and it was deeper. Right now, having been away from it from about 6 months, I can see I had to discover all this stuff outside of her. Now I really know who I am in some way. So that's another initiation of some sorts. And too many men just don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, you got to know who you are, and you got to love yourself. It's like that. People fall in love with that new relationship energy. That honeymoon phase.
You know Jung's theory on it?
No, tell me.
It's fascinating. He believes that men especially project their soul onto women, right? In modern day and age, we live in the least spiritual era ever, right? And we have a need to be spiritual, I think. Even if you don't believe in it, I believe in it personally, but there's still an unconscious need to be spiritual, right? If you look at the history of humankind, we've been drawing pictures of God since the hunter-gatherer eras. We always needed to believe in something outside of us throughout human history. It's been part of our evolution. So when we don't do it, our souls or our bodies end up doing it for us in some kind of way. And love becomes that religion. So men will look at a new beautiful woman and be like, and project this divinity onto them. It's like God onto them. And then they'll treat her like a god and make her feel responsible for making them feel good all the time. And then when that inevitably goes away and they're human, you see a human woman in front of you, men will then look for the next honeymoon phase to be like, I need that feeling again. So that the dance, in my understanding of it, is love is cultivating a relationship with your soul, yourself, that beautiful feminine soul in yourself as a man, and then loving a human on the other side of it.
Oh, yeah, that's powerful. And one thing, I mean, me and my partner, we're in an open relationship. And so one of the things that we've decided in our partnership is the journey and our commitment and vows for one another is I vow to love myself, because the more I can love myself, the more I can love you. And if she does the same, and we have this sovereign energy, and I think relationships get so enmeshed, but when two wholes come together, it's not, people look for the one to complete them, and it's two halves to a whole.
It's in you.
It's in you. You got to find that other half within yourself. And once you do that, find another whole person and being able to go on the journey to support each other. Because I don't truly believe like any relationship is forever eternity. I believe eternity is right now. And so if this relationship is serving us right now, and relationships are just the greatest mirror. I mean, one of my biggest woundings was my mother wound. And I didn't want to be responsible for my mother's feelings. And I talked about, a little bit of the narcissism and emotional abuse that I experienced was, and it's fascinating, the pattern and all of this showed up in my relationships unconsciously, is when I would share something that would hurt their feelings, like I just don't want to be responsible for it. And I got that from my mom. And so when I walked away from my relationship and I was in the van traveling nomadic free, I really learned who I am. And I found that happiness and that centeredness and that alignment within myself. And what happened is there's wounds and there's growth that can only happen within relationship, within that mirror. And so being with Sarah, my partner, and sticking with it there's been moments where I'm like, I want to leave this, I want to detach, I want to be free, but that's not me growing. and me sitting in the fire and being able to alchemize, like, how am I showing up? What is this teaching me about myself? And we've gone through some really deep experiences where we've come back together in a really beautiful way. And being able to, we both talked about one of our biggest ideals is freedom and being able to be free. And I think there's a lot of people that do open relationships, and they do it from a very immature, unconscious way of like either fear of commitment or this, especially as men, desire to sleep with other women and have that
Hedonistic in some way.
yeah, the pleasure and seeking that like new energy or whatever it is. For me, it's been, I don't want to I have a big heart, and I don't want to navigate life with a closed heart in certain situations. I want to be able to navigate with an open heart. And what I found is if I meet an attractive woman and there's an energy connection and I can feel it, if I didn't have this open relationship, which our open relationship is based on the foundation of truth. And so me being able to share, like, I had a connection with this woman, not projecting where it's going to go or anything, but being able to just be fully honest and transparent with that is really powerful. And if we didn't have that open, truthful dynamic, if I felt that energy, there'd be a guilt of like, oh, I'm not supposed, like a traditional marriage, like, oh, I'm not supposed to do this. So I close my heart off, and I'm like, I'm not even going to look at this person. I'm not going to talk to him because I just feel guilty.
Yeah.
Now, because we're in an open, truthful dynamic, I'm able to navigate life with an open heart and experience these connections that happen all the time, and be able to not attach a story of like, what does this mean, but being able to connect with people. And that alone, for me, is very fulfilling. There's very few times I'm like, I go end up sleeping with people. I mean, I've had a few different partners, but it's that ability to navigate life with an open heart is the freedom that I desire. And I don't want to close it off because I feel guilty of a relationship. I'd rather be in truth and share what's actually taking place, because it's not just, I mean, I can't control when connections happen, but I can communicate them with my partner and include her in that experience, which has been really expansive for both of us.
How do you manage like levels of love in a way? What if you were to like fall in love with someone outside of her? How'd that go?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think right now I'm not really available for that. I think, I have another partner, and it's very like easygoing, and it's very casual. She's not looking for like a serious partner in me because I've clearly communicated, like, I'm married, I have a kid, I have building a business, a lot of different projects, don't have a lot of time to invest in like a deep relationship, a partnership. But, me and Sarah talk about that all the time. It's like, if that comes up, then being able to communicate through that and understanding like that new relationship energy is always going to feel like that. It's always going to feel like I found the one, and it's going to feel more exciting than maybe me and Sarah. But if I'm open and honest with her about the energy I'm feeling with another, and I bring that energy into our relationship, that new relationship energy, I found it actually enlivens our sex life, enlivens our connection, enlivens and reconnects us in a beautiful way. And so it's really being open and honest with Sarah, my partner, and then open and honest with these potential partners, and being fully truth, like, hey, this is where I'm at. And communicating, is this something that you're open for? Because I'm not available for, being on the phone every night. Like, I just got responsibilities, so it's just a different energy. And with open relationship, this is another thing. It's not like you get to a point where you figured it out, because every single connection is different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very fascinating. So every different connection, communicating it differently, it brings up different stuff within all the dynamics and being able to communicate. And it can be exhausting at times too. And that's why it's not like doing it with reverence and sacredness, and not just like free floating around, just like kind of sharing energy in that way.
How do you manage your ego if she meets someone?
Oh man. Yeah, I haven't really had to experience that in a very deep way yet. She's had one experience that was just like an opportunity to go, hang out with another couple, which was beautiful for her. And what we talk about is being really patient with it and building trust. And so for me, she's been in open relationships before, so she has a lot more experience with this than I do. And so for me, when she first told me, it was like, the intensity in my heart and the constriction, like, oh God, what does this mean? And her being patient with me and us working through it, and me feeling those emotions and talking about it, and then, going and hanging out with them, but setting a boundary of like, hey, don't necessarily like sleep with them yet. And like, what is that like? And slowly building that trust with everybody involved, and then getting to a point where it's like, okay, I feel comfortable with it now. I trust them. I trust you. I trust the experience. Like, let's move through that together. But again, that's different with every single connection. And so she just went through, I mean, we have a 2-year-old. And so the last couple of years, all of her energy and sexual drive is really going into building this human. So I know that's going to evolve as Luca gets older and she's more open for those connections. That's definitely something I'm going to have to process.
Yeah, that's why I have no judgment for people who do it. For myself, it's that I would just my ego's huge in many ways. My mom was never home much when I was a kid, so I had this unconscious need to hold on to her. Like whenever every night for me was her running away from home and me grabbing her ankle, being like, "Don't go, don't go."
Yeah.
So for me, there's this jealousy that rises out of that, and I feel the jealousy. It's more so that if I knew the person I love was out there with someone else, it'd be too much for me in
It's
the
like
moment.
a fear of abandonment, right? Like they're going to abandon you for this other person.
Yeah, it'd be it re-traumatize a lot of stuff. Maybe it'll grow, but it's just something that for now I couldn't do. It would bring a lot of things to. And also I have had sex addiction in the past and stuff, so it's I don't know if it'd bring the best out of me if I, were to do that. But it's just that main thing. I don't know if I could sit with that feeling.
Totally. You got to know thyself. And that's why with us, it's the patience thing. Different emotions come up in different times. Even someone I've been seeing for a couple months and we've worked through it and we're feeling really good. There might be something that triggers Sarah that's and she just feels something. And so being able to hold the space for that and not taking it on, but being able to create safety within myself and safety in her. And I'm still learning that. I mean, I have challenges too, because my wounding is I want to pull away because I don't want to feel responsible for her feelings. So it's been this challenge of holding her in her feelings without taking them on. But it's definitely a process, bro.
When did you meet her? Did you meet her after the NFL or when did you meet her?
I met her. I was in Fit for Service, the Aubrey Marcus community, in 2019. And she was in the same community as a year-long cohort. We did a few different summits. And what's really fascinating is there's 150 people in it. And we had a lot of the same friends, but we never actually connected. And we were both going through our own different relationships and stuff like that. So the timing wasn't really right. And then first weekend of March 2020, we went to a retreat one of our friends was putting on, and it was the first time we connected, and definitely felt the energy there. And so we're let's stay connected. And I was traveling the whole month of March. I was going to Phoenix, Tampa, then San Diego, LA, San Francisco, and then New York. I was just on this traveling kick, going to all these different places. And she was actually going to be down. She lived in Colorado at the time. She was going to be down in Austin during mid-March to do some business stuff. And we were staying in touch, voice noting, and I was oh man, we're not going to be able to make it happen because I'm going to be traveling, but we'll make it happen at some point. She was going to be going to Guatemala right after that. And mid-March when I was in Phoenix is when the pandemic really started hitting. And I was there for spring training to watch some baseball with my dad and my brother. And spring training got canceled while I was in the air flying. And so I was this is a real thing that's happening. The NBA got canceled. All these things started getting canceled. Then all my events I was traveling to started getting canceled. It all started shutting down really quick. So I hit her up. I'm hey, looks like the world's going pretty crazy. I'm going to drive back. I have a rental car. I don't want to fly because I don't know what this thing is. I want to drive back to Austin. And if you're going to be there, I'd love to see you. And this is when I really fell in love with her. I got a voice note back, and she's hey, Joe, I had a real honest conversation with myself this morning, and all of my stuff that I was supposed to be down in Austin for got canceled too. And the only reason I'm coming down is to see you. And the fact that she had the courage to say that and be honest and truthful was really powerful for me. And so she drove from Colorado 14 hours down to Austin. I drove from Phoenix down to Austin, and we went on our first date in mid-March 2020, and there was nobody out, and it was before all the restaurants closed. And she stayed the night, and we had a really good time. And the next morning, she was hey, it looks like the world's getting pretty crazy. Should I stay here? It looks like they're locking down everything. And I was yeah, why not?
No way.
Yeah, and so she ended up staying there. We did the quarantine together.
It's crazy.
3 months later, she was pregnant.
That's an insane story.
Yeah.
Were you in that 3-month period? Did you feel it was right the whole time? Is this you felt were you ever get the fuck out of here? Were you ever this is what it's meant to be?
Yeah, it was really interesting because it was a bubble of this new relationship energy. And it was really beautiful because we went from not really knowing each other to living with each other.
I never heard something like that.
Yeah. And throughout that, I mean, time slowed down during that period too. It was really interesting. And we had a really powerful experience connecting with each other. And we had a few different experiences that really brought us closer. Her period was late, 2 months in, and we're oh shit, 3 days late, what does this mean? We didn't really like talk about it. And then like finally her period came and it was like, she's like, hey, my period came. I was like, okay. And then we talked, it was like, would you be okay with if we had a kid? And so that kind of opened the conversation of that. And then, we went to her house in Colorado and met with our friends for the first time. There was like a group of 5 people, and it was the first interaction since the pandemic. And we were really nervous because we had this bubble that we lived in with just each other. And so it's like, how do we interact as a partnership within, like, as the world opens up? And so we started having those conversations. And we actually went to an ayahuasca ceremony in Colorado together. And she had a really intense experience. And this soul came to her in the ceremony, in the visionary space, and said, I want you and Joe to be my parents. And she went through this big ego death, and the soul's like, for me to come in to your guys' life, you need to die. And I think what the soul was talking about was this idea, because she's really professionally minded. She's a really badass entrepreneur. She's been an entrepreneur her whole life, and had multiple businesses. And so what the soul was referring to is like, in order for me to come, like, you're gonna have to let all that go.
Be a mom.
Yeah, and be a mom. And so she went through this really challenging thing, and she was really nervous about telling me that. And so the next day she was like, hey, like, I had this experience in ceremony. It's like really hard for me to tell you because we'd only known each other 3 months. And she's like, this soul came to me and said, I want you and Joe to be my parents. And that was the first moment I was like, oh, wow. And I started feeling into it. And I've already felt this like fatherly energy coming online. And I'm really grateful that it happened in that way, because it wasn't like the traditional route where, you with a partner, a couple of years, okay, now it's time to get married, then let's get a house, and then, okay, let's start a family. There's this soul that came and said, I want you to be my dad. And it felt so much bigger than me. And she told me that and was feeling into it. And then the next day we were at the house, she went to get some groceries, and she came back and she's like, hey, a really weird experience happened at the store. I was holding the grocery basket like this, and some random guy was like, I know a mother when I see one, the way you're holding that basket. And she's like, what the fuck? Like, that's so weird. Like, why would that guy tell me that? And so she went, immediately bought a couple of pregnancy tests. She came back home and she's like, I don't think I'm pregnant because ayahuasca really messes my cycle up sometimes. And so I'm going to do these P tests, these pregnancy tests. And she did it, and she ended up being pregnant. And she was actually 7 days pregnant during the ceremony before the soul came and said, I want you to be my parents.
Do you feel that level of unconditional love you're missing from your ex-girlfriend with her? Like, do you feel like you can be loved for who you are, not being an NFL star? Like, do you feel that with her strongly? You can just be loved for just being you?
Yeah.
How much better does that feel?
Yeah, it feels good. I think it's really comes back to me loving myself. And, the last 3 years we've been together have been a deep journey of self-love. And so being with somebody that is on a similar path of growth and expansion, and being able to be mirrors for each other and hold each other, because it's really interesting. I think this is probably across the board, I would say, for the most part, but we tend to magnetize towards energetic signatures that play perfectly into each other's woundings.
Yep, for sure.
And so her wounding, her main wounding is her father wound. And her father, she talks about this publicly, is left her when she was between 10 and 14, lived in another state. She's Australian, in Australia. And she didn't find out until 4 years later that he actually had started another family. And he had just said, I'm going to come back. And so she ended up finding out that he had totally abandoned her. And so her biggest fear is abandonment, of me abandoning her. And fascinating how that plays perfectly into my, I don't want to be responsible for your feelings. So me feeling responsible, if I leave, that it's just going to destroy her. So I'm holding this weight of, I don't want to hold your expectation of me being here because I want to be free, but then me being able to show up in that healthy masculine of like, I'm not going to leave you, and we're going to continue to grow and evolve together. And the fact that we have a kid, I remind her all the time, like, we are in relationship for the rest of our lives because we're parents to this beautiful soul. And so how do we want our relationship to look and expand and grow? And it can evolve in so many different ways, and we can communicate through that. But I'm not leaving you. Like, we're in relationship, and that relationship is going to continue to evolve, and it's up to both of us to grow. And whether we're together in a romantic way the rest of our lives, or we continue to evolve into different ways, we're open to having those conversations. But standing in that strength of, I'm not going to leave you. And, I'm not responsible for your feelings, but I can hold you and love you. And holding that energy and her being able to hold me and my feelings and being able to allow me to speak my truth and the things that may hurt me that I feel like my mom never really was able to hold has been very, very healing for both of us.
Yeah, I believe a conscious relationship is the ace card in healing because I think our love wounds or our parental wounds are the deepest ones we have, right? And
Mm-hmm.
often our wounds are so coated in shame that when we feel seen for them, they kind of just release and vanish. So if you have a conscious relationship where you can say, without, I think people get it wrong as you like project the need to be fixed. Where you're like, I'm having this trigger and it's your fault. Like, do something to fix it. Don't do that. But for me, it's basically just speaking to it, saying, when this happened, I felt this. I'm not asking you that you're wrong or to do something different. Just like see me for this. Just hold my hand while I just like feel this process. Just feeling like that feminine energy with you or masculine on the opposite side, while someone expresses their wounding, it makes a dramatic shift in the healing process. You start feeling seen, but you couldn't be. You start feeling seen for what you couldn't feel seen for as a kid, and that's a
Yeah.
huge shift.
Yeah, we had a really beautiful experience with a therapist when we were going through a really tough time together, probably about a year ago. And in that therapy session, um, we were able to access one of my core wounds with my mother and not feeling seen or heard in my feelings. And because I couldn't give her the reassurance that she wanted, which would trigger her and pull her away. And so because we had a third party mediator there, the therapist was able to hold the space and allow me to go into those feelings and allow Sarah to witness that process of me just feeling the energy and being held and letting go and being seen. And what we were able to work through that is when I like being able to advocate for that part of myself. And, at times when I say something that is vulnerable or I'm processing and I just need to be held, and she snap kind of triggers and starts saying how it affects her and what her feelings are. Now I have the tools to say, hey, Sarah, like, I really appreciate what you're sharing as well, but I don't feel seen and heard in this. And just advocating, I'm going to advocate for that part of myself right now. Can you just say, like, just sit here and hold me just for a second? Just like, let's just pause and just honor what I'm feeling. And then we can move the conversation and energy. And that little thing, like being able to advocate for that part of myself, and even the language of parts work, I really like, because there's a part of me. It's not the whole me. It's the part of me that feels hurt right now. And so I just need to feel seen and heard and held in that part. And then once that happens, it's like, okay, I feel safe again. My nervous system's regulated. Now let's continue the conversation.
Yeah, I'm always curious about how our shadows affect our relationships. So, the shadow of the NFL for you of feeling, love for being a function or that regret, that grief. How has it shown up in your relationship? How are you managing that? Like for me, I have one of my shadows is I'm a perfectionist in many ways. Like I only feel good if my expectations, what I think life should be, are there. Whether it be some numbers on a podcast or money, whatever. It's like I only can feel good if I have a perfect standard, even eternally, right? If I feel good all the time and my thoughts are good, I'm like, I'm a good person. But if they're not, I'm like, fuck, what the fuck am I doing? So then I'll project that onto a partner of mine and be like, if they're in some shit, I'll expect them to be perfect. That's my thing. So how does your wounding from like a professional standpoint or in your body affect your relationship? What's like the core wound that you bring that you're trying to work through?
Yeah, I think within relationship, it's kind of what I've already shared with the feeling, not wanting to feel responsible for other people's feelings. And
Is there rejection stuff there too? You talk about rejection, feeling the problem, of feeling rejected over your career. Does that show up here too?
yeah, rejection and abandonment. I have an abandonment wound as well. I think we all have all the wounds. And so if I take care of myself and I'm not responsible for anyone, then I'll never get hurt.
Yeah.
So there's that vulnerability of allowing myself to rely on someone else and to lean on someone else and to be held by someone else. And I think it's been really cool within our relationship because both of my biggest ideal is freedom, and I want to be free. I want to feel free. I want to continue to strive for deeper levels of freedom, which is really the drive that's allowed me to question deeper paradigms and psychological processes and letting goes of these structures of what I think I needed to be and what reality is. And always thought that freedom was just me being in my van on the road alone with my dog. but I've accessed levels of freedom I didn't even know were possible within this relationship. And it's been really, really beautiful to continue to expand and access that, which I never thought possible within relationship, but it's actually deepened it within relationship. I feel freer now than I ever have.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive. That's a masculine essence in a way. It's searching for freedom. We think we can only do it in our egoistic ways of going on a van or taking a solo journey, but it often comes up in relationships. To end here on this question, how have you become more free in a relationship?
How have I become more free?
Like how is it actually you referred to saying you thought you'd feel more free in a van, but you actually feel more free with someone else?
I think one thing Sarah's really taught me that I'm extremely grateful for is the power of truth and bringing that stuff out of the shadow and allowing it to be seen. And that's one of her biggest ideals is truth and being in truth, even the hard truth, speaking the truth. And because she's challenged me in that way and created a safe space for me to work through my wounding, because a lot of times like I keep stuff in the shadow because if I say it, it's going to hurt this person I love, which is the mother wound. If I say something that I feel and it hurts my mom, like I'll just hold on to it because I can carry the weight of that myself. And so I was carrying a lot of this weight and realizing I don't have to. And because I've been able to access that truth, it's shown up in strength in our relationship, but it's also allowed me to navigate life with a lot more freedom and being truthful with everybody I come in contact with. And even, I meet a woman now that I feel a connection with, like instead of being like, oh, I'm married, I have a kid, and instead of like keeping those details because I'm scared of what it's going to do to this connection, because I've had experiences where I say that and the woman's like, oh, I'm like not interested anymore. Like, but if I don't say that and I keep it in the shadow and I explore this connection for a few weeks and all of a sudden say, hey, by the way, or they find out that I'm married and they're like, what the fuck?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, I'm being honest and truthful with you up front. And it's been really cool because even women that might not necessarily like understand open relationship or that dynamic or be in one themselves, they appreciate that so much that a lot of those relationships have evolved into friendships or connections. But taking that stuff out of the shadow and just really laying it all on the table is one of the most profound lessons I've learned, and I'm super grateful for it. And I think it's something that the world needs a lot more of, is that feeling safe enough to really speak the truth and bringing that shadow into the light.
Yeah, because what you're saying is one thing, noticing in yourself. It's different to feel free enough to express to other people, to say, hey, this is me. Like, see me for it, accept me for all this stuff I bring to the table.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different experience than just seeing it for yourself in some way.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your beautiful, amazing story. It's truly one that I commend you on being where you are now, because I think most people in your position would be, drinking a bottle of whiskey each night or being stuck on, I could have been this and that, but you truly come to terms with what happened and are building a beautiful path for you forward. So all power to you.
Thanks, brother. I really appreciate it. This studio is freaking epic. I love the new age sage, man. Wishing you the best. And yeah, man, it's what I'm really passionate about, is supporting specifically elite athletes in that transition, and also, helping high impact leaders and entrepreneurs go through these processes so that they can really drop into the heart, learn to love themselves, understand themselves, and bring that energy of the heart into what they're doing in the world. And so alchemizing my journey and my lessons into the work that I'm doing now has been really powerful, and I'm really grateful for all of it and grateful for the opportunity to drop in with you, brother.
Of course, tell people about your podcast, where they can find you, all that good stuff.
Cool. You can find me on Instagram at joe.hawley. And my podcast is called Life Beyond the Game, where I bring on former elite athletes to talk about the transition process and the psychological processes that we go through, and how those journeys have propelled us on a deeper journey of self-discovery and healing, with the intention to inspire anyone who may be going through their own transition in life, which we're all going through a transition at this point, because we're all moving through this great big paradigm shift. And also just launched a community. I've been doing these whitewater rafting wilderness expeditions the last few years, and like I've spoke about through the show, I'm really passionate since leaving football about building community, because one of the things that, it's a loss of identity, loss of purpose, and loss of community, that locker room feel. And healing, I believe, can only really take place within community, being seen and witnessed within community. So really powerful about, what does community look like, how to build community. And so over the last 3 years, I've really learned and grown and expanded in these understandings. And you can't just build community because you want to. You have to go through some type of experiential process to create those unbreakable bonds, to break down the walls of who we think we need to be so that we can really shine for who we are. And so launching a community, applications are open now for the next couple weeks through mid-May. I don't know when this podcast is going live. But it's specifically for high impact leaders, entrepreneurs, and influential visionaries. There's 40 founding member spots, and we're using these whitewater rafting wilderness expeditions as an experiential process, as an initiation into the community to build the foundation. And then I have really cool visions for how that community, we can leverage the energy of a collective to have greater impact in the world than we could ever have individually. So the vision is to really bring these high impact, influential change makers together to facilitate greater change in the world through the energy of our hearts and how we implement that into our businesses and creations. And so that's called the Heart Collective. You can go to theheartcollective.com. It's HART. And yeah, would love for anybody who feels the call to be a part of that to apply.
Great. Well, thank you, man. I
Yeah,
appreciate
bro.
it. Check it out.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you want to watch more content, click this video right here. And please don't forget to subscribe right here. Thank you.